Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. But first and foremost, obviously, we're picking up with the aftermath of the last episode. Iris is still in the state that she's in because obviously her mind was remapped while she was inside the Mirrorverse and coming back into this world, and now it's like, Barry feels so bad because he remembers everything he did, leaving Singh and Camilla, forcing Iris through, fighting his team, and they're like, no, we get it, like, that wasn't you. He's like, no, it was me. It's like, they're like, we'll get a pass, we'll figure out the issues to the artificial speed force, but for Barry's like, no, we can't do that again because I'm not Thawne, and I'm not going to become like him, just this brutal, like, calculating, trying to, having kind of, like, no emotions, no love. So it's like, obviously, kind of the worst time not to have his speed too is considering Eva is, as they kind of say, invasion of the pod people. Because, well, in this case, the mirror people, because mirror people start popping up all over the place. We got Sue popping up back in the story, and Joe's like, whoa, aren't you supposed to be? She's like, yeah, I had to pop up because those aren't my parents. And Joe's like, no, I get it. He's like, I've been getting reports all over the place that people they've known for years are like, yeah, this person isn't acting like themselves. Something's weird. Once again, Central City, so you probably have to be like, yeah, some crazy stuff is going down. So it's kind of like on a regular basis, like, so Joe knows immediately what's going on, and I'm figuring that Eva's replacing everyone, and obviously Barry can't do too much because without his speed, he's like, I could at least patrol the city to check on things, but now it's like, we have to be wary of Eva because she's gotten so powerful. It's not just mirrors, any reflective surface, so we're just kind of blocking out everything. But then all of a sudden, it's like, there has to be a way, and then he's in voice saying, there is, and he gets pulled back to Matola Tech and meets with Eva. And I thought it was interesting because for Eva, it's like, I'm not your enemy. Like, I can do so much good for this world. Like, and I thought was really interesting for her. Well, it's basically her way of looking at things, that, like, I'm going about things like she's planning on replacing the entire world because it's like, you people have taken this planet for granted. Yes, I'm not human, but I'm something better. Like, I've seen all the flaws that humanity's have, and I won't make them again. Like, and you guys, Barry, you can be the one that leads your people into the Mirrorverse, and you can make that your home. You'll get adjusted to it and everything. But for her, it's like, with my technology, I can save the world. I can end this. I can end that. But also, it's also that thing of like, Barry, you're a hero and everything. It's like, yeah, Ramsey was never a hero. He thought of himself as one, but he wasn't. But you are. So kind of do what's best for your people. Do best for everyone. Because, yes, you're the Flash, you're a hero and everything. But all the things that I'm willing to end, all these aspects of human life that, start like starvation and stuff like problems like that you're a hero, yet you haven't been able to use your powers to fix that. She's like, because you can't. I can. With my power, my resources, I can make that happen. And it's that problem of like, yeah, Barry's able to save his city. He's even been able to save the world on occasion, but not be able to deal with a lot of like the bigger issues that aren't like necessarily like a universal, but more just a world issue of just like not being able to do anything. So it's like, think about it, We don't have to be enemies. Like, I can save this world, and you can save everyone you care about by just going through life. So don't, stand in my way, because she will go through anyone that, sends in the way. So, and Barry had kind of given up hope, and then all of a sudden, O.G. Wells, Harrison pops up. It's like, wait, Nash is like, nah, Harrison, Dr. Harrison Wells, and it's like, whoa, okay. So I love that this show kind of goes about explaining it, but at the same time, it's like, no, don't worry about it. It's like, but how? No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's kind of what I guess it's kind of what I thought it was, but but mostly not. Because the way Harrison was kind of explaining is that basically, the universe needed to balance itself out. He's like, I'm the 0.001%. Like, Nash basically had every Wells in the multiverse inside of him, which included me, but the universe needed to kind of balance itself out when all of them disappear. So it needs, because, to make sense, there's at least one Earth. There needs to at least be one Wells to kind of balance the scales in some shape or form. So it was a thing of, hey, like, you managed to survive. But what was interesting too is like, Barry is like, oh, because of Crisis, every Wells came together from one timeline and, you know, one Earth, one timeline. And so that still didn't quite make sense, because that moment everyone else meets up, it's like, oh yeah. It's like, wait, which Wells is he? He's like, yeah, I'm the OG. And I love his explanation. He's like, okay, and that's how I'm here. Wells, and Wells, and that's it. I'm here. Any questions? Literally everyone but Cisco raises their hand, and he's about to go into an explanation. It's like, no, don't worry about it. But, like, see what I mean? It's like, I guess it's one of those things, like, I guess it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, I don't. But it also translates a little bit about what we saw at the end of the last episode. Apparently, we end up finding out, go ahead and talk about it. He's the timeless Wells, because he can time travel along his own timeline. He's like, I have 92 years of life. I can go back to any moment I want to. So I was like, that's fascinating. So I guess, like, maybe it was a byproduct of him being a part of that collection of Wells. Like, maybe he was always destined to have that power, or did that power become a byproduct of the crisis event collapsing everything on one Earth? So maybe that kind of, because I'm assuming that also with literally every world came back until Oliver used his powers to basically bring everything together. Obviously he made some changes, so I thought maybe on some level, but then I was like, that didn't make any sense, but obviously we saw Wells' body, and that was some time ago, because the way his body was, like, decayed and stuff like that. So I was like, the time has passed. I was like, but then he popped up from the grave. Like, I was like, I wasn't sure. I was like, did they go back? Was that something Oliver changed? Wells has technically been out there the entire time. I was like, no. The moment Nash died, like, he came back. I don't know. It might even be a byproduct of the Nashes disappearing, and under the circumstances that the multiverse, I don't know. It's kind of like don't worry about it. It's really interesting to think about, you know, but it's not something you need to necessarily get caught up on the details of. I'm sure there's people who can explain it a lot better than I. It's just one of those things, like, I think I can wrap my head around it, but I'm also like, I'm thinking too much about it. But that's what I do. I think a lot. I think about stuff way more than I feel like it's 100% necessary, but still. Regardless, I thought that was such an interesting thing. But obviously Barry had lost hope, because it's like, hey, we're facing an enemy, but it's like, obviously Harrison remembers everything the other Wells did. He is like, basically they imprinted their memories on him. So even though he never had any experiences with Barry, it's like, oh, I know who you are, Barry Allen. Like, you know, I have memories even though we've never actually met, which is kind of interesting. But he also talks about, like, what are you? You are the paragon of love. And, you know, you don't need, like, you know, some gigantic, like, it's like, run towards love. And he kind of, you know, he's there with Iris. And when he touches Iris, a spark happens, and it makes him think of, like, 2 other times throughout the series. I want to say that time he was unconscious. I'm assuming that was supposed to be when he first got struck by lightning. Another time they sparked, I think, was it was actually the time Iris ended up finding out his identity, like when he ran away from her, and they sparked, and that's where she was like, Barry? Like, when she first discovered he was the Flash. So, but then it kind of gets really interesting, because now they're kind of saying, like, how I immediately interpret this, and maybe I'm still kind of getting it wrong, because I'm still trying to grasp my explanation for that, is that basically a part of the Speed Force, it's like Speed Force is energy, and it never completely dissipates. Like, obviously energy doesn't dissipate, it transfers, so that there's some part of that energy inside of Iris. Either at some point in time it transferred her, but I think more specifically, like, it happened those 2 times. Like, that's what that spark represents. It's like, because there's a part of the Speed Force living inside of Iris. Like, it's been there, like a little spark that's been there the entire time. They just needed to kind of basically light that spark and expand it. But I thought that was actually kind of interesting, because they even talk about, like, well, remember, Iris was a speedster, and even saying Nora became a speedster too, because obviously we still never got clarification on whether that's, like, hereditary or not, because at least with Barry and Iris and Nora, that's, like, unknown territory right there. So it's like, they didn't really dive into it, but I think this is kind of explaining, like, how Nora also ended up a speedster, not just because of Barry, but because somewhere inside of Iris was the essence of a speedster. That's probably why, like, the speed situation kind of worked out for her as well, because obviously it doesn't work out well for a lot of people. We've seen kind of how that burns some people out, but I'm thinking that there's been some form of the Speed Force that's been inside of her the entire time, and that also translates into why, like, Nora got it. It's not like, you know, she was chosen by the Speed Force, but also, like, it was kind of running through her blood in more ways than one, through her dad and her mom. I just thought that was kind of interesting. And so for Barry, it's like, we just gotta, you know, instead of an artificial Speed Force, we can, use the basis of an organic one. So while the city's kind of going up in flames, kind of turmoil, as like Eva's like replacing people left and right, Joe and Cecile are trying to run. Once again, it's just kind of that like, oh, like that creepy thing of like, oh, like this world isn't yours anymore. We're our mother's children. Which I like the name of like, oh, she's not like the Mirror Master anymore. It's like, oh, I'm Mirror Monarch. Which honestly, once again, I'm all about the alliteration, so I'm totally about that. But still, I like the titling though. But obviously you had Harrison being like, yeah, do you guys normally do this? Or you like, what you're about to do is such a gamble. You could basically, your atoms could all get split in half. But then all of a sudden, Iris kind of almost on autopilot, like her desire to help Barry, like, it's like, we need you. And she touches it and Barry's like, I know this will work. So he running towards love, because he'd even talked about it. Like, I always wondered why I was the paragon of love, because me and Iris together, kind of represent that love that is the basis of, because he was always like, why did that like translate back to my speed? Because that spark has always been there between them. Like, so there's been some spark inside of her to jumpstart him. So like, once again, making her his literal lightning rod, like that. She always has been in both a literal and metaphorical sense, but even more in the literal sense in this regard. And like running, thinking about everything and everyone, thinking about Wally, thinking about Iris, thinking about Joe, Cecile, Camilla, Caitlin, everyone, the people he loves and who he fights for. So got his speed back and prepares to fight Ava, but just regardless of everything, she's still faster than him. Obviously, she's able to make all those mirror copies. Obviously, Cisco's doing his thing, Frost is doing hers. To me, one of the sickest things, once again, it's just like, where did that come from, was when he was running up the building and he spins in a circle, and instead of just doing a regular lightning bolt, he like extends his arms out and he's shooting out constant like electricity. I was like, that looked like a Black Lightning and Firestorm move right there. I'm like, has he done that before? I was like, that looks sick as shit, dude. I lost my damn mind. I was like, that's so freaking cool. But, regardless of anything, Eva's still faster and kind of has more power than him. But luckily, it's a thing of like, Barry can't just beat her with, just fighting alone. So he ends up, Iris actually shows up, and granted, she's able to match Eva a little bit with power, but Eva still has more power than her. But Iris was able to talk her down, because it's like, you said you want to help people, but does this look like helping people? Like, you aren't giving these are defenseless people you're attacking. And it's like, you said you wanted peace, but look, is this really the route to peace? And then she turns and looks. Because obviously her technology was taken from her and done, and terrible things were done with it. But it's like, look at what you've done. Look at what all the damage you're causing, And she actually looks upon it. And Barry was like, get back, Wolf. But it's like, no, Iris is like, no, like, let me try this. And so her, more so than anything, Iris, with a little help from Barry, was able to reach her to be like, you want to build a better world, you do it through compassion, not violence. And in that moment, Eva was like trying to undo it, but she couldn't. Like, her children had run, like they were so far beyond her control. But with Iris and Barry by her side, she was able to kind of pull them back, pull everything back and destroy all of those. Because Iris had talked about, like, look at the mirror Iris. That mirror Iris connected to this world. She was brought here just to, keep me, keep everyone in line and just keep up this ruse and experience, manipulate and, control the situation and be your eyes and ears. But she became more. She became her own person at the end. And it's like, because she connected to this world through love. But your other mirror versions, they're controlled by, consumed by hate, So, but luckily she was able to stop all her children. Luckily, Joe was about to step through the mirror, but luckily, mirror Cecile shattered. And in that moment, Eva returned everybody in the world. And because for her, it's like, she's going to go back home. She's going to do what because for her, she felt like, I failed two worlds. It's time for me to take what I was going to do here and do it in my world, because that's where she belongs. The Eva from this world is gone. And it's like, because she was so driven by like, I need to do this. I need to get back to my world. I need to get, this world, because she thought, this was her. She thought like, oh, my husband left me here, but it's like, oh, I'm not the real Ava. So it's like, wishing her good luck as she goes back to her world, which I think that's really interesting. That obviously, if time ever comes about it, they could potentially count her as an ally. Granted, she's going to be wanted in this world for murder because like Ralph was able to get the evidence that Sue was innocent. So it works out in that regard. So I think that, so granted, if she ever comes back to this world and kind of like everyone knows she was responsible for all this stuff, which I'm sure people are going to make an argument. You're just going to let her go? She called it all that mayhem. She did kill her husband. It makes you wonder whatever, cause last time we saw, like, where are the rest of, like, her people? Like, did they get replaced? Like, all the metas that were working for her, like, are they just out in the wild now, too, or what, Like, after she was exposed last episode, like, the one that was with her last episode just bounced, so we don't know. Like I said, she's somewhere out there in this world, maybe. But, it's that WandaVision thing of, like, are you just gonna let Wanda go? It's like, same thing for Ava. It's like, well, I'm sure that's gonna be that complicated thing of, like, but I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing as, like, Batman. You're really locking these people up in Arkham? These same people who bust out time and time again and who do, it's kind of that same thing, but it's also like, I'm sure you can make that argument. I just thought it was just, that's going to just, it's just popping in my head just because of all that. But, it's actually interesting too, because like, this is one of the few occasions where they also don't kill one of his villains. Like the main overarching villain doesn't get killed. Like she's, like I said, that's why I'm like, if time comes about, like they could definitely bring her back and they can join forces, because it's also a situation of like, we didn't beat you with violence, we beat you with love, and it's like, it's very poetic, because I even loved Chester being like, oh, that's romantic, when he talked about, like, when Barry was talking about him and Iris and everything. It's like, oh, that's so romantic. But like them together, like Barry being the paragon of love, that being his ultimate weapon, that being, what helped save the multiverse, what ultimately ended up helping save Central City, I mean, even the world this time as well. So I think that's kind of interesting. Like I say, like when you think back, like literally every other main villain is dead. Because even when they try to reach out to him, like Ava's like one of the few people that like Barry was able to reach heart to heart with, and because of Iris as well, so interesting development. Obviously everyone's excited because like, hey, Singh is back, and he's like, yeah, I'm sure it's because of a certain speedster and his better half, and it's like, yeah. Camilla's back, and like, Cisco's so happy about it, and so everything, worked out in the end. There was some interesting moments that we never got clarity on. At one point while all that stuff is happening, Harrison looks to the side, he takes off his glasses, so I'm like, what are you looking at? Like, I guess maybe, could we find out because of the whole timeline thing, maybe he was looking at, like, maybe at that moment he was peeking through to a different point in his life, alright, it's like, once it's all said and done, I know, maybe he knows, like, where this is all going and how it's all going to play out. Maybe that's what it was. I was almost thinking, like, not unless that's him, like, winking and nodding to, like, the other wells, like, not unless they exist inside of him, but I was like, we never explained, like, what that was. But, yeah, Allegra wants to obviously keep him around. It's like, oh, I need someone to train me. It's like, no, but you kind of have your own flow to things. But for him, it's like, I'm a time travel, up my timeline. And, it's like, obviously, it's like, I would have to move forward without her. Because obviously, he like, only got 4 years with my wife before, obviously, Eobard, So for him, it's a situation of, I can spend those 4 glorious years with her until my time runs out. So I guess, even going up and down its timeline, I guess either implying that like that power will eventually fade and he'll kind of disappear, or either that, or it's kind of saying like until like his timeline eventually catches up with him, even though he can go up and down it, like eventually it will catch up to him. I guess is kind of what that might be implying, but him and Cisco saying goodbye, because Cisco didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Nash. He never had an opportunity to kind of say goodbye to some of the wells, so this is kind of... in some occasions they did, but this is, it's like, oh yeah, we don't even really know each other. It's like, how can you miss someone that you didn't really know? I also love the whole thing of like, well, how do you time travel? And he's like this, and just disappears, so that was pretty dope. What was also interesting was the Ralph thing. I was so curious how they were going to handle that. Just because of the Hartley Sawyer situation, so I'm like, I'm not trying to bring it up one way or another. You can feel however you want to about it. I was curious. I was just curious, like, how are you gonna handle that? I don't know if it was in the reviews or I feel like I brought it up somewhere, but maybe I didn't. Maybe it was just I thought about it, but maybe I never have. It's not recorded anywhere. But I was like, well, Ralph is the elongated man, and he can shapeshift into other people, so you could literally get anyone to be that character going forward. Like he might be like, I'm in disguise and whatever. I mean, to be fair. When he was helping Sue clear her name, basically Eva apparently blew up McCulloch tech, and like his face is kind of melted, but they put him in like the suit and everything at the end to kind of help. And it's like, oh, you'll be back to your old self. So I don't know whether that's technically his. It's like, oh, if you ever need me, I'm gonna be around. So I guess that's their way of closing up that Sue and Ralph storyline. Because I was about to say they left that storyline so. I mean, obviously, like, maybe this was the far-going conclusion. Like, maybe the storyline was always going to end this way. Because I even love, like, it's like, oh, like, hey, you ever thought with your skills, Sue, you could join our team? And she's like, no, calling Barry Fleetfoot or something like that. And it's like, nah, you guys are do-gooders and me being me. No, but me and Ralph are going to go out. There's other organizations like Black Hole out there that need to be stopped, and we're going to work together to do it. Like I said, this is obviously continuing and ending where season 6 was originally going to end. So, because I think this is the actual season finale. Because I think season, was it 5? I think was actually 22 episodes as well. So, but regardless, I was wondering, like, maybe it's a situation of this was always going to be where Ralph's story was going to take him. Because obviously some characters come and go throughout, you know, when they're part of Team Flash. So that's what I was wondering, if that's what kind of happens in his case, or whether they wrote it like this specifically to kind of write his character out the show for now until they fully decide what they're going to do. Or maybe they're not going to touch, maybe they're going to reference him from time to time, but maybe they're never going to touch that again. Which is kind of a shame, because you create this whole Sue situation between him and Sue, but maybe, like I said, maybe that was always the plan. Like I said, I get the feeling like the next time we see Ralph, probably going to be a different actor, and it's like, yeah, my face didn't quite come back, or I'm playing incognito or something. I don't know. So that's where I'm like, no, let's the whole Hartley Sawyer thing change. You never know in the future. Maybe there might be a way to like change that situation. Like maybe he gets hired back to jail. I have no idea. Maybe it'd be a thing of like they have no interest at ever going like hiring him back, regardless of anything. Maybe it's just kind of a done conclusion, and it's like I said, this is their way to send the character off, not killing it off, but it's like, hey, you're somewhere out there and doing your thing with Sue. Like I said, interesting development. I also love that Barry was like, oh, it kind of reminds me a little Death. He's like, well, you know, and Iris was like, Barry, stop, don't, babe, don't do that. He's like, what? Come on, you love it. Also, it's like, hey, Iris, you might be a meta now. Like, I mean, you know, with the mirror powers, but it's like, nah, the moment Ava left, she probably took the powers went with her too. So, but I'm guessing whatever effects Iris had too are gone, but I'm sure that experience is still going to stay with her, and I'm curious to see how that kind of shapes her over the course of the rest of this season. But, yeah, still, like I said, a lot of interesting developments in that regard. So, it's like, oh, we did it. Team Flash, yeah. We make a pretty good damn team. It's like, yeah. And it's like, and I should also talk about, this is probably the most positive a season has ended off. You know, because usually, well, I guess the most they have us the stinger at the end, but it's like, this is probably with the exception of maybe season 4 might be the only season that ended pretty positively. I mean, the only thing, the stinger of season 4 was Nora, but it was like, it's a pretty positive stinger. And so, like, this is, like I said, I think this is the most, like, uplifting, everything kind of worked out. Like, it's all good ending, so, to a season. So, like I said, what would have been the ending of the season 6. But, yeah. But we did get the stinger at the end, and, like, obviously when, basically, you know, the Speed Force came alive again, we see it kind of split off into, like, 4 different streams. So I'm like, okay, I don't know whether Wally automatically got his speed back in that instance, or whether that's supposed to represent, you know, maybe he did, but it's also potentially representing there are other speedsters that were born in that world just in that moment. Which also makes me wonder if it's going to, I mean, because, you know, I've talked about it before, but obviously I'm going into the rest of the season having no idea what to really expect to a certain extent, because we know that, the Godspeed storyline that was kind of brought up, like, in and out of season 6 is going to come back. You know, because also we got introduced to Godspeed in season 5, so it's like, but that ended up being someone else. But this whole Godspeed thing being, you know, something else entirely. So it's like, okay, so what's that all about? Maybe that has some connection to this, because I think I've talked about it before, but like I think from the research I did a couple years back was that basically Godspeed was born from the Speed Force storm, and technically the Speed Force storm popped up at the end of season 3. So that would have been the moment Godspeed was born, but it never came about. So now you're also because also there's that huge storyline thing that like everyone's always kind of going back to. You'll constantly see pictures on the internet, like Google about it, but it's like, I'm blanking on home dude's name. The dude that Iris was dating for a while that was Joe's partner in season 1. That dude, when he sacrificed himself because he was actually Eobard's like ancestor or whatever, like, still haven't circled back to that story, because there's a whole thing of like, oh yeah, his body got sucked up. It's like, that was back in season 1. We're on season 7. We have still not touched that storyline at all. So it begs the question, like, is that going to be what the Godspeed thing ends up being? Because there was obviously thought at the time of like maybe he was Zoom. But it's like, yeah, his body got sucked up the way. It wasn't like he just, when he died, he stayed there. It's like, no, his body got sucked up. Maybe all this multiverse stuff, all the crisis stuff, like, we don't know, like, what kind of long-term effect. Like, they might have been, that might be their way to make this go full circle. That might be like a final season thing that they decide to touch on. Maybe that's next. I don't know. Once again, we don't know what this Godspeed thing is. But maybe it has some connection to it. Like, maybe that's supposed to be like another like Speed Force storm to a certain extent, is like it going up like that. But like I said, we don't know whether that created more heroes, more speedster villains. Like, we don't know what that will mean, but it's going to be interesting. Like I said, going into this season, like having an idea about it being about Godspeed, but still not knowing what this means. Obviously, everyone kind of getting readjusted to, like, after everything they've been through, being back together, and what that necessarily means and what that necessarily... Like, I'm really interested to see where the rest of the season ultimately ends up taking us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.